Now the speaker. The pulpit is yours.
I'd like to welcome our guests who are worshiping with us today, as well as our regular members. And we are continuing to take a look at the Beatitudes and how the Beatitudes lead us to a complete conversion. Each Beatitude is a building block that leads us to that complete conversion. And so let's start here with Matthew chapter 5, where we've been for the last several weeks. And again, I just want to recap these because I wanted to stay fresh in our minds how they are building blocks to that complete conversion. And in verse 3, Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." Those are the ones who know they need a Savior, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And of course, as we go from one beatitude to the next, we always sense our poorness of spirit. We never feel like on our own we are rich. We will always need Jesus. Every step of the way, we will never not need Jesus. As Frank was singing so beautifully, I need him every hour. And that is so important for us to remember, because there are many people who try to have a golf cart relationship with Christ. A golf cart charges its batteries overnight, and then in the morning you unplug it and it runs over the course the rest of the day on its own power. We are not golf carts. We are trolley cars. A trolley car must stay connected to the cable the entire day. If that connection to the cable is severed, that trolley car is not going to move an inch. Friends, we are not golf carts. We are trolley cars. We stay connected to Christ because without him we are nothing. And as Frank's saying, we need him every hour. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Verse 4, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. And that's a mourning for our sin, realizing our weaknesses and that we're nothing without Christ and that we have sinned. We become meek. Verse 5, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. And that's not this earth, it's the new earth that we will inherit. Verse 6, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. And again in Ephesians 3:19, it assures us we can be filled, with all the fullness of God. And then when we become filled with God's righteousness, we don't become self-righteous, because again, we realize we're nothing without Christ. And so we become merciful. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. And that brings us to today's beatitude in verse 8. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And it's only the pure in heart who can see God. If we are looking for evil, we're going to find evil. And if we're trying to find the bad in others, like Daniel's colleagues were doing in Daniel chapter 6, trying to find something bad, if that's where our heart is, looking for evil, we're never going to see God. That's why Paul told Titus in Titus 1:15, to the pure, all things are pure. If you're looking for purity, you're going to find purity, and only a pure heart can find purity. Only a pure heart can see God. If we have hearts that are evil surmising, always looking for what's bad, what's wrong, we will never see God. We see God when we seek for him with a pure heart that is looking for what is pure instead of what is evil. Jesus says something very interesting a few verses later in Matthew chapter 5, verse 20. In Matthew 5, verse 20, Jesus says, "For I say to you that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven." Well, that's not such a nice thing to say about the scribes and Pharisees, right? Unless your righteousness surpasses their righteousness. But here is the problem with the righteousness of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. It was all on the outside. It didn't come from within. They wanted to make everything look good on the outside. You know, the white picket fence houses. You know, I read an article a while back. I was born in the mid-60s, so I missed out on the 50s. But I read an article about the 1950s, and in the 1950s, there was a lot of pressure to make everything look perfect. And that's why in the 50s, the white picket fences were so popular, the nice little clean suburban neighborhoods. Everything looked good. You drove by a neighborhood and everything looked perfect on the outside of the house. Because in the 50s, everything was supposed to look perfect. But I went on and read that in the 50s, they were far from perfect. That's why if a girl got pregnant out of wedlock, she had to go live with her aunt on the other side of the country. Had to get rid of her because everything had to look perfect. And so it was all on the outside. Christ isn't looking for us to be perfect on the outside. He's looking for us to have pure hearts and to be pure on the inside. That means not only are our actions right, that means that our motives are pure. You know, if I go to visit grandma in the nursing home every week, that might look really good, but if I'm only going to make sure I'm in the will, then that's not so good. That's not a pure heart. And Christ is looking for us to serve him with a pure heart. Not just making it look good on the outside, but that purity that comes from within, that can only come from God. And when we have those pure motives, we are going to share God with others. A pure heart wants to share Jesus. As a matter of fact, I'm reminded of a story in 2 Kings chapter 5. Second Kings chapter 5, beginning with verse 1. It says, "Now Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was a great and honorable man in the eyes of his master, because by him the Lord had given victory over Syria. He was also a mighty man of valor, but a leper." Okay, so Naaman is a leper, great leader, Syrian leader, but he has leprosy. In verse 2 it says, "And the Syrians had gone out on raids and had brought back captive a young girl from the land of Israel. She waited on Naaman's wife," so she was a slave to Naaman's family. Now, I'm thinking if I had been a young person taken away from my family and forced to be a slave in another land, I might be pretty bitter about that. And I might be upset. But this young girl had a pure heart. And in verse 3 is this, "Then she said to her mistress, 'If only my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria, for he would heal him of his leprosy.'" So you see the pure heart of this young girl. If I'd been taken captive, away from my family, forced to be a slave for some other family in another land, and the father of that family got leprosy, I'd be like, serves him right. I'm glad you got leprosy. You deserve it. But that would be a bitter heart, and this young girl had a pure heart. And with a pure heart, she had to share God with those who maybe weren't even treating her the best. And so we know the story. So the king of Syria reaches out to the king of Israel, and finally they arrange a meeting with Elisha, who then has Naaman dip 7 times in the Jordan. And of course, Naaman had a little attitude about that. Why couldn't I just dipped in some other river? Why did I have to come here? But in the end of the story, Naaman does as the prophet Elisha tells him. He dipped 7 times in the river, and he was cured of his leprosy. A wonderful miracle performed by the prophet, but that miracle never would have happened if that young girl's heart had been bitter. But she didn't have a bitter heart. She had a pure heart. And a pure heart always wants to share Jesus with others, even if the other people we share it with are mistreating us. Now, last Thursday evening, just a couple of nights ago, a lady friend of mine in Tampa, we went down to the St. Pete airport and we picked up Lori so she could come and be with her mother for a couple of more weeks. And as we were driving back up to Homosassa, Lori was sharing with us her testimony and how a young girl led her and her husband back to Christ. And as I listened to that story, it was so amazing. I told her, I said, you've got to share that. I told her, I said, I want you to do that as a sermon sometime. And so we were talking about it, and we decided, I was just so anxious for everybody to hear this story. I told her, I'm going to write you into my sermon this Sabbath. And so Lori graciously agreed to share her story that greatly blessed me, and I know it'll bless you as well. Lori, thank you for being here, and thank you for being so willing to share your story with us.
It's amazing how God works, isn't it? I asked William if there was somebody in the church that might be willing to pick me up from the airport so that my mom didn't have to drive because she's not at her best right now. And William said, I'll do it. And here I am. So I did make some notes on my phone just so I didn't forget anything. But Amber, is it right, Amber? Do I have the right name?
Amberlyn.
Amberlyn? I'm so glad you're here today because I'm going to tell you a story about a 14-year-old girl and how she led us, she allowed God to lead us to Christ. So I recently read in Amazing Disciples, put out by Amazing Facts, that people can argue with your theology, they can contradict your interpretation of the Bible, and they can ridicule your faith. However, they can't argue with your testimony. So I want to share my testimony with you. I'm a teacher in West Virginia. I live in Maryland. And in August of last year, I started tutoring a Spanish-speaking student who had transferred into my school system from Puerto Rico. Rachel is her name, I wish she was here with me. I wish you could meet her because, my goodness, she loves the Lord. At the time, Rachel was 14 years old, and because of that language barrier in the classroom, she was suffering academically. So I offered, in a meeting that we had with her folks, to keep Rachel after school each day as much as she needed, as long as I was available, and as long as she wanted to stay for an hour or two after school to tutor her to help her get through her classes. And over the course of a few weeks, it didn't take long because she's so personable and I'm a talker too, we became great friends. And we opened up about our mutual relationship with God, or our mutual belief in God, I would say. At that time, my relationship wasn't super strong, but I've always believed in God. I think this was on a Thursday. And I told Rachel one day, so one day Rachel says to me in our tutoring session, she said, "So what church do you and your husband go to?" And I said, "Well, I'm kind of ashamed to say that we don't actually have a church right now. We know we need to find one, but we don't have one right now." And Rachel said, "Well, you can come to mine." 14 years old, friends. And she's inviting her teacher to church. And I said, okay, so tell me a little bit about your church. At this time, I did not know she was Seventh-day Adventist. But she got very somber. And she said, "My church teaches from the Bible." She said, "If you have a question, we will open up the Bible and tell you where to find the answer." She said, "My church teaches from the Bible." Now, my husband had heard lots of Rachel's stories because I was falling in love with this child. She's just amazing. And so I took out my phone and I made a little video. I said, "Tell my husband why we should come to your church." And she repeated what I just told you. So I went home and I showed my husband the video, and he was duly impressed with her as well. And we agreed that we would go to church on Saturday. So now this was on, I think, a Thursday. So I'm going to back up just a couple of days. About on Tuesday, before Rachel posed the question and the invitation to me, my husband had come in to me, and he kind of said to me in jest, "If you could ask God one question, what would you ask him?" And I don't know. I don't even remember what I said because really it doesn't matter. His question for God was, what came first, the chicken or the egg? And we had a little laugh over that. It was, kind of funny. Okay, so that was about Tuesday. Rachel invites me to church on Thursday. Now we're back to Saturday morning. We're pulling into the church parking lot, and my husband taps me and says, "Look," and he points to the church bulletin that's outside, the big board, and it said, "What came first?" That's not a coincidence, friends. That's God. So we went into the church flabbergasted because of that. And the pastor pulled up his sermon, and it said, "What came first, the chicken or the egg?" on his PowerPoint. Now, the story wasn't really about what came first, the chicken or the egg. The story was really about what came first, what comes first, salvation or good works. Okay, just so you know, my pastor's not out there teaching about chickens. But it was a great sermon, and it was about how good works salvation. God doesn't wait for good works before he accepts us, right? So that was a real wow for us. We knew at that moment that we were in the right church. Never a doubt in our mind from that moment on that we were in the right church. Okay, let me find my spot. Now, my pastor's wife, Elaine, kind of wears the pants in the family. I know she'll agree, and he would too. And she had said to him, that chicken and egg sermon was written by another pastor in our conference, by Stuart Pepper. And Pastor Jim, my pastor, had kind of adopted it as his own, changed it up a little to add his own personality to it. And Elaine had said to him, I've been praying regularly, we've been praying regularly for all of these inactive members. I want to have a special Sabbath where we send out invitations and we call these missing inactive members. They're not really missing. Inactive members. And we invite them to church, and I want you to preach the chicken and the egg sermon. It would be a perfect sermon for that week. So he says to Elaine that week, Pastor says, I'm going to preach the chicken and the egg this week. And she said, you can't. I haven't had a chance to invite everybody that I want to invite, and there's no way I can get a hold of everybody this week. And he said, Elaine, I need to preach that sermon this week. God's calling it on me, and he's impressing upon me to preach that sermon this week. And so she was a little frustrated with him. She says, I was so mad. If you knew Elaine, you'd get it. But she just said she was so mad. And he said, I need to preach that sermon. Well, you know what, guys? He preached that sermon for us. That was for us. God knew we were coming that week, and that sermon was for us. He was preparing us. So I want to back up a little bit further to tell you about how God had paved the way for that invitation and for us to accept that invitation. Because there was probably a time, I can't say probably, there was a time where if Rachel had asked us to come to church, I probably would have politely declined. In January 2021, so this is backing up because this was last September when all of this happened that I told you. So go back to January. My husband and I were at a really low point in our marriage. We were both making bad, destructive decisions. They were affecting our marriage. We were not invested in each other. We were not invested in our marriage. And quite honestly, I probably had one foot out the door. It was not good. My son, my 18-year-old at the time, works for Chick-fil-A. His owner and operator of that Chick-fil-A store had offered free family meals once a week to all of his employees. And, you know, Bill, the owner, likes to say that Chick-fil-A chicken is more than just chicken. It's ministry, right? They like to claim that, and I believe them because Bill definitely had an important part in our lives as well. So my son started bringing home once a week this family meal deal. And I told you, our lives were not in a good place at this time. There was a lot of turmoil in our home, a lot of anger, a lot of tears. It wasn't going well. And yet, this one night a week, the four of us, I have two sons, we would connect and say, okay guys, what night are we all gonna be home tonight? Which night are we doing Chick-fil-A? And it became kind of a weekly thing for us. And it was one night where the four of us sat down to dinner and put all of the strife aside and just spent time together as a family. Sometimes there was a game night afterwards, and it just became this great time of fellowship in my family. It really blessed us. So I sent Bill, the owner and operator, a thank you email and just said, I want to tell you how your meals have blessed my family. It might just be chicken to you, but it's really blessed my family in a way that you couldn't understand. My husband and I have been in a bad place, and this allows us to sit down and connect as a family. Bill responded to me, to my email, by telling me he'd like to send my husband and I to a marriage retreat. Wind Shape is in Rome, Georgia, just north of here. And it is a non-denominational, Christian-based marriage retreat. They have phenomenal services. It's wonderful. They do intensives for couples who are really in dire straits that are a week long, but they also do what I like to call vitamins for your marriage. They're just a weekend investment. You don't have to be in trouble. It's just a great way to go get closer to your spouse. And we've been now twice, and we will definitely be back next year. So in August, he said to me, here's the link. Go find a retreat that you'd like to attend and make your car reservations, make your plane reservation, take care of it, let me know what I owe you. And he sent me a check plus a couple of $100 for the cost of all of it to cover gas and food and any extra expenses. Bill paid for everything. That was the start of our we need to find a church. That weekend is where this place is so amazingly God-filled. This camp, this retreat is so amazingly God-filled, and it started to bring us back to Christ. So that whole thing from COVID, because that's what caused the free Chick-fil-A meals to come along, because he wanted to offer some financial support to his employees through free food for his families of his employees. COVID led to that, which led to me thanking him for that, for blessing us, which led to us going to a marriage retreat, which was softening our hearts towards God and towards each other. And that paved the way to us being ready to accept Rachel's invitation. And Rachel likes to say that she had nothing to do with it, that it was all God. But I tell you what, she's my little best friend. I love her to pieces. She's 15 now, and she just has this spirit for God. And I had a video, I wish we could pull it up so that you could meet her, where she talks about how she's just always wanted to allow God, always wanted to use God. And she used to say to God, please use me. I'm 14 now. When are you going to use me? When are you going to use me? And she is just being used in amazing ways. And she doesn't take any credit for it. She just gives it all to God. But she's allowed God to do that in her life, which has brought us to where we are. In April, we were baptized in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, my husband and I. And one of my coworkers and dear friend, Sue, has been attending church with us and doing Bible studies with us, which is exciting. And we've started a group in the school, which William, I forgot to mention to you too, that we've started a group in our school where we have between 15 and 19 students coming once a week to hear different visitors speak. My pastor has been there, I think, 3 times. To speak, and I'm trying to bring in different denominations because I don't want to scare anybody off before we get them loving the Lord. I don't want to scare them off ever, but I want them to know that God loves them regardless, and it's working. And so my pastor, the last time he was there, he said, I've got cold chills. I can't believe I'm standing in a public school praying with kids. It's amazing. So God is doing wonderful, wonderful things through just this ministry, and that's my story. And I hope that, Amberlyn, I hope that you walk away knowing that God uses kids. And there's a couple youngsters in the room. Let him use you. Be a light. Walk into, don't be afraid. Rachel says, it doesn't matter what other people think of me. It's what matters what God thinks of me. And she's amazing, and I love her to pieces, and I know God does too, and I know he's very proud of her. So thank you for letting me share.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Now you know I just had to have her give her testimony today, right? Amen. So thank you very much. And if you'd like to see the video, send me a message on Facebook. We weren't able to share it here today, but if you send me a message on Facebook, I can send it to you because it's on Facebook. And again, you'll get to meet Rachel. And I just thought it was so beautiful. I watched the video. And like Lori was saying, she was saying, I didn't have anything to do with it. When Lori and her husband were baptized, they had Rachel come up and stand with them while they were being baptized. And she was in the video saying, why? I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything. But she did a lot. And of course, that's what happens when you have a pure heart. God uses you to do great things, and you give God all of the credit. Another sign of a pure heart. And I'm very thankful for the young people that we have here. Lori, thank you for encouraging them. And as a matter of fact, next week, Tommy, one of our young men, will be sharing the gospel presentation with you. Next week, I'll be preaching up in Holland, Michigan. And Tommy will be having the sermon here next week, sharing the gospel with us and how to share Jesus with others. So we're looking forward to that. And of course, I want to encourage all of us. None of us are too old or too young to share Jesus. He uses all of us. And so I just want to encourage us. And again, Lori, I don't think it was just by chance that I picked you up from the airport. I'm so glad I picked you up from the airport. And I'm so glad that you shared this testimony today. Thank you. Our closing hymn, I believe, is hymn number 602.